Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today we're going to tackle a first level adventurer because nothing says D&D to me like half plate, a hand and a half sword, and not a lot of other gear. So I found this fella. He is on My Mini Factory. I will link to the STL. This is a 3D print, but I've seen plenty of miniatures like this available through commercial means. So if you're looking at some of the Reaper Bones miniatures, or officially licensed D&D products, the differences here are going to be fairly minor. The technique and really just some of the colors is what I want to show you. So all of those paints will be listed in the description below too. Let's keep this nice and quick. Let's get started. So once you've got your miniature all assembled, it's time to prime them. Now for this fella I've used grey from Vallejo. It's one of the rattle cans, and I've used this because it's pretty commonly found. There are also plenty of alternatives. The grey here doesn't matter too much. Just a light grey Halford's car primer if you happen to be in the UK, for example. Now I've chosen this because instead of priming him silver, like if we sprayed him silver because a lot of him's going to be armor, well, we're then going to have to painstakingly reach the parts underneath to paint those without hitting that silver in order to save time. But that's just going to make things take longer. So instead, we're going to start from a quite light primer and then start layering our colors from the bottom up. So the lowest point on the miniature is definitely going to be his skin. And for this, I'm going to start with Barbarian Flesh from the Army Painter. Now the brushes I'm going to use today, these are mostly quite cheap little ones from the stationery aisle. You can of course get nicer brushes, but for the most part, especially really simple painting like this, you'll see it's not going to matter too much. So for his eyes and the part of his face which would be hidden behind the visor, we'll just jam some paint in there and we can tidy up the faceplate as we go. Same too, don't forget he has hands. I always forget hands. And if you do find you have a little bit of the primer showing through, just come back in a couple of minutes once this first coat is dried and you can apply a second. With the skin done, we'll move up to the next step, which is going to be his shirt. Now, of course, you can paint any color you like here because we're not constrained to reality. But I think going fairly plain here is going to work a little better. So I have skeleton bone, and you'll see I'm not too fussed if I do hit buckles and what have you. I just want to make sure that I am getting a solid coat of this onto a shirt. So, again, not really worried about straps or armor. Just make sure each low level is nice and solid before moving on. And when it comes time to paint his trousers, this is quite a prominent part of the miniature, so I decided I wanted a colour which was really going to stand out, and one that I really like. This is Elemental Bolt, again, still from the Army Painter, and it is a wonderful, rich turquoise colour. And honestly, how often do you see this sort of thing on a miniature? It's one of those things I think we shy away from sometimes when painting some fantasy figures, especially those which look vaguely familiar to us from a historical bent, where we go, oh no, that wouldn't look right, that wouldn't be realistic. Well, damn, that's cool. I really like this color. And, with no opportunity to use it mostly, well, why not? I'm painting for me, let's have some fun. The other beautiful thing about Elemental Bolt is that it covers really well. Some of the larger areas of his legs, I'm going to come back and give him a second coat, but we'll see how this one dries first. Boy, oh boy, that's bright. Now, you've seen the finished product, so of course you know how it's going to turn out, and there is a reason that we start from such a bright base color. But hold the faith. We're going to move on now to his boots, and I'll flip them around for this. And for this I'm going to use leather brown. At last, and I'm not going to use leather brown on all of the leather. You'll see I'm splattering over it quite quickly here. I'm going to paint just his boots in this. And then for the other leather colors, we'll instead be using fur brown. Now this is a nice warm red and works really well for leather colors. So what I'm going to do is apply this over his equipment and straps. And I have moved down to a slightly smaller brush here. What I'd suggest is take your time when you come near to areas that you have already painted. So slow down near to his shirt and what have you. And if there are any areas where it's going to be difficult to reach later, If you're going to make a mistake, try and spill in the direction that'll be easier to clean. Now I know that sounds crazy, but here for example, with this very light shirt, if I make a mistake, I want to draw my brush towards the green because the green will be easier to reach to tidy up. If there is going to be a time-consuming part on this miniature, it's going to be that. And that's probably true of most D&D stuff. There's normally a lot more straps than you care to find. I'm going to go ahead and start painting in his armor plates, and for this I'm using gunmetal. I'm going to mention that dreaded reality again, because honestly, what I'm doing here, I'm going to use two different colors for the metal. I'm going to paint gunmetal on his armor, and we're going to use a different one when it comes to his sword. Mostly because I want it to be a little shinier. But of course, in reality, they would probably be about the same color. But we're not worried about reality, we're worried about what looks cool. Now there's the value in painting up. Because we've now just put on what is almost the last layer, well, he looks pretty much done. There are a couple more details that we do need to finish off though. And if you are going to stick to painting the sword rather, in a separate color, I have here plate mail metal, which is a little bit lighter. Now as well, I'm also going to paint in his buckles and any other minor metal details I'll paint with this. So to finish off those last couple of highest details, I have brain matter beige, which is a wonderful name for an off-white. And I'm going to apply this to the fluff on the cape here. Now I've got way too much paint on my brush, so don't do what I do here. Then some black. I'm going to paint in his scabbard, and I'll also paint in the grip of his weapon with this. I think it frames the left and the right quite nicely that way. Now when it comes to his base, it is of course going to depend if he has an integrated base or one that you've put onto him. I've done a few videos on basing before, but today I'm going to use Filthy Cape and just paint in the stonework on his base. Now once that's dried and you've done any last minute cleanup you need to do, he's ready for a shade. Now for this I'm going to use Strong Tone, but we're not going to use it straight from the pot. Instead you'll see I've got here one of my little palettes from the cheap end of the stationery aisle. We're going to go ahead and add just a few drops of Strong Tone into this. So 1, 2, 3, let's say 4. Yeah. Then I'm going to get a big brush and some clean water, and I'm going to add about a third of that in water. And you'll see we thin that down, but it still doesn't lose its color, which is going to be super useful in a second here. And sticking to the same big brush, we're going to apply this over the entire miniature. And our water mix is going to make sure that this flows very easily into all of the recesses, but the color isn't going to be overpowering. Let's get him in shot there. So very quickly, over the whole miniature, make sure that you are working it into any recesses. So up under the feathery, furry bits there. And yeah, once you've got all of them covered, you can find them somewhere warm to dry. And once your wash is dried, you're going to have something that looks like this. And that is not too bad. You could quite happily put them on the table like that, I would suggest. But if you're not liking how it looks, or you want a slightly stronger finish, what you can do is mess with your mix. Either use less water, use Strong Tone straight from the pot, or, as I have done, go back over certain areas with a second coat. So you'll see his trousers are a little glossier than some of the other parts. That's because they've had a second coat of that wash mix. But from here, we can do a couple of highlights just to make some of those details pop a little more. And for that, we're going to go back to our base colors and some brain matter beige. So still using our palette here, I'm going to do 2 drops of my elemental bolt, and then 1 drop, eventually, of brain matter beige. And this is a really effective way to get a very simple highlight with just 2 colors. You don't have to then go buying 100,000 different colors, you can just mix up your highlights. Add a little bit of water as you mix this together. And then with a small brush, you can start finding some of the edges where you want to accentuate that detail. So, as you see, I'm being quite careful as I approach, just flicking my brush down until I find, there we go, there is the edge. Now that same mix ratio will work quite well with other colors too. So with fur brown, for example, 2:1 with brain matter beige, and we can highlight our leather. Now for some colours, of course, which are already quite bright, that's not going to work terribly well. So for the skeleton bone, I've done half and half, skeleton bone and brain matter beige. Just a few little tickly lines of this here and there. Just take your time. The last of the colours I'm going to highlight this way will be his skin, and for this I'm back to 2:1, Barbarian Flesh and brain matter beige. So just little bits like along its chin, a little bit there. And the backs of knuckles are always a good spot for this too. Now obviously if we try and mix brain matter beige into brain matter beige to make a highlight colour, what we're going to end up with might surprise you. So instead, in order to do the highlights on his fur lining, I'm just going to use ordinary white. And instead of painstakingly highlighting every one of these flicks of fluff, all I'm going to do is just quickly, essentially dry brush along the edges with a bit of white. Now one last consideration is whether or not you want to highlight his armor. Obviously we can't really mix white into a metallic, it doesn't work very well. But what I'd suggest is grab yourself some shining steel. This is really very bright, and we don't want to use much of this at all. So just along some of the edges. So just little dabs of this near to the edges of the armor. Don't worry if it's a little rough. It will look, instead of being a splotchy highlight, it would look a little more dinged up. Now same as with any other color. If you're worried about your highlights being a little too blocky, what you can do is go back to your base colors, so gunmetal or whatever it is you were using, and you can tidy those up. But what I'm going to do now is go ahead, take him outside, hit him with a matte varnish, and I'll just paint the black around his base to finish him off. Let's see what he looks like when he is all done. And there we have it at last, our adventurer is complete. Now I think this goes some way to demonstrating that you don't need for everything to be perfect just to get some miniatures on the table. Particularly if this is your first time painting, or if you've not been confident in it before, don't sweat the little stuff. Alright, all of the highlights that I've done, you can go back and tidy up as well. You never need to feel as though you've messed up a miniature to the point that it can't be salvaged. It's all just paint, and if push comes to shove, most miniatures you can strip them, or, if you're 3D printing, just print a fresh one. But the important thing is to enjoy the practice. So, whether you are doing this for years, or you're just having some fun getting paints out for the first time, I thought it was fun to go back and really examine some of the easy stuff. So, shade and a highlight, what's easier than that? So, as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my wonderful producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Jimmy, and Rod. Your support helps me do this stuff. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.